This analysis uses open source information and scenario modeling. Some visuals are dramatized for explanatory purposes. At 4:12 UTC on February 28th, a coalition precision strike shattered a restraint that years of shadow warfare had carefully preserved. Iran tested American air power. The fallout now threatens shipping lanes that carry 20% of the world's crude. It pressures energy markets already on edge, and it strains a fragile diplomatic order across the entire Gulf. How close is this to wider regional spillover? At 0412 UTC, on February 28th, commercial satellite imagery captured the unmistakable signatures of coordinated airstrikes on Iranian territory. Analysis from two independent outlets later confirmed impact points at Natanz and Fordow, sites long associated with Iran's nuclear program. In Tehran, secondary explosions were reported near a Revolutionary Guard command center, though open-source verification remains limited to satellite change detection in a handful of geolocated social media posts. Coalition officials framed the operation as a precision raid, emphasizing a narrow military objective and the use of advanced munitions to minimize collateral damage. Iranian authorities, by contrast, described the attack as an act of open aggression, vowing a proportionate response. Within hours, regional newswires began circulating images of missile launch plumes and damage to infrastructure, but the full extent of the strike's impact remained uncertain. Public statements from both sides focused on deterrence, yet the evidence pointed to a clear escalation. The strike targeted not only military assets, but also the credibility of Iran's security guarantees to its allies. As the news cycle accelerated, shipping companies flagged new security advisories for vessels transiting the Gulf, and insurance underwriters began recalculating risk premiums for the world's busiest oil corridor. The time-stamped raid at 0412 UTC stands as a verified inflection point. Its consequences ripple outward, raising a critical question. Does this action remain a contained military exchange? Or is it the first move in a broader regional confrontation with global stakes? Iran's leadership, through official statements from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, has set clear boundaries. Any strike on leadership compounds or export terminals is a hard red line. The regime relies on over 300 ballistic missiles and a network of proxies, but faces pressure from sanctions and unrest at home. Its overriding aim is survival, to deter attacks without risking a confrontation that could threaten its grip on power. Israel, led by Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and senior IDF officials, justifies its posture as preemptive defense. Precision air power and naval assets form the backbone of its response options. The government faces domestic demands for decisive action, but any use of chemical or radiological weapons by Iran is the declared threshold for a large-scale response, potentially inside Iranian territory. The United States, represented by Central Command and the Fifth Fleet, draws its own red lines. Attacks on American forces or the Strait of Hormuz will prompt decisive action. Congressional oversight and anti-war sentiment at home limit escalation, but the United States maintains air and maritime dominance and seeks to avoid a prolonged ground conflict. Direct strikes on United States personnel or critical naval assets are non-negotiable triggers. Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain denounce Iranian aggression and prioritize uninterrupted oil exports. Any closure of Gulf energy routes is seen as existential. While air and missile defenses have improved, internal constraints make direct confrontation with Iran a last resort. Proxy networks, including the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Quds Force, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iraqi Shia militias, threaten retaliation if Revolutionary Guard headquarters or leadership compounds are targeted. Across all actors, public threats often mask more cautious calculations shaped by domestic and alliance pressures. This analysis uses open source information and scenario modeling, and some visuals are dramatized for explanatory purposes. Simulation and dramatization are for analysis, based on open source references. It is not verified real-time battlefield footage. Military escalation follows a pattern analysts call the ladder, a sequence of steps that raise the risk of broader conflict. In the Gulf, the first rung often begins with tactical airstrikes or missile launches, like those recorded on February 28th. Within hours, both sides face compressed decision timelines. Tactical commanders must interpret radar contacts, incoming alerts, and ambiguous signals in real time. A single misread, such as mistaking a civilian aircraft for a hostile target, can push the crisis up another level. Open source reporting identifies three main progression points. The initial stage is a localized exchange, limited air or missile strikes, often justified publicly as deterrence. The second stage involves proxy pressure, groups like Hezbollah or the Houthis targeting shipping or launching drones, expanding the conflict's footprint without direct state attribution. The third, most dangerous tier, is cross-border escalation. This could mean Iranian missiles striking a U.S. base in the Gulf, or coalition forces retaliating against targets deeper inside Iran. Each step compresses the window for diplomatic intervention, increasing the chance of miscalculation. The risk is not just in the hardware or the headlines, it is in the pace. Command and control networks are stretched thin, and the volume of simultaneous alerts can overwhelm even experienced operators. In this environment, a single ambiguous radar blip or a delayed ceasefire order can trigger a chain reaction. At every rung, the opportunity for controlled de-escalation narrows. The next step often comes faster than anyone expects. The Strait of Hormuz operates as the world's narrowest bottleneck for oil, carrying an average of 20 million barrels per day, about 1/5 of all petroleum consumed globally. Each supertanker passing through this channel represents not just a shipment, but a critical link in the world's energy supply. When regional tension rises, the impact is immediate and measurable. Shipping insurers, watching for missile launches or naval standoffs, raise their risk assessments overnight. During past crises, premiums for war risk coverage on Hormuz voyages have tripled, and charter rates for large crude carriers have jumped by 15 to 30%. These costs are quickly passed along the chain, feeding into global oil prices and, ultimately, consumer inflation. If the strait's flow is interrupted, even temporarily, the alternatives are limited and costly. Rerouting a tanker around the Cape of Good Hope adds 10 to 12 days to the journey and increases fuel consumption by roughly 1/4. For a fleet already operating on tight margins, that means higher operating costs, longer delivery times, and more exposure to piracy and weather risks. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Suez Canal together carry nearly 20% of global oil trade, but their capacity cannot simply absorb a sudden surge from the Gulf. Pipeline infrastructure and regional security constraints limit how much oil can be diverted. These physical choke points turn military risk into direct market exposure. A single incident, whether a missile launch, a confirmed mine, or even a credible threat, can send insurance premiums and oil prices sharply higher. For shipping companies, the decision to transit or delay is not just about profit, but about risk management in a corridor where a local flare-up can echo through the global economy. Oil price spikes are only the first sign of trouble when tankers are delayed or rerouted out of the Gulf. As shipping times stretch and insurance premiums climb, the cost of moving crude, chemicals, and manufactured goods rises across the board. That extra expense does not stop at the refinery or port. It filters into everything from gasoline to groceries. For central banks, these shocks are a familiar warning. Input cost inflation pushes up headline consumer prices, while volatility in energy and freight markets can trigger sudden swings in exchange-traded funds and commodity indexes. Policy teams, watching inflation expectations rise, may respond by tightening interest rates or accelerating emergency liquidity programs. Each move carries its own risks. Higher rates can slow economic growth, but waiting too long risks letting inflation spiral. The toolkit is well rehearsed, but the speed and scale of maritime disruption mean households feel the impact long before policymakers can restore stability. 3 forward scenarios now shape the horizon, each defined by its own triggers and warning signs. The first, controlled de-escalation, depends on diplomatic engagement and a visible reduction in military activity. Early indicators would include a drop in the frequency of missile launches, the resumption of back-channel talks, often mediated by the European Union or China, and a loosening of navigation advisories for commercial shipping. Insurance premiums on Gulf routes would begin to fall, and satellite imagery would show fewer military convoys near key choke points. The second scenario, prolonged gray zone pressure, is characterized by ongoing proxy attacks and limited airstrikes without direct ground engagement. Here, the signals are persistent drone or missile threats against shipping, steady but not escalating sanctions, and continued rotation of U.S. carrier groups in the region. AIS vessel tracking may reveal more frequent route deviations, while diplomatic statements emphasize deterrence but stop short of ceasefire terms. The third, regional spillover, is triggered by a direct strike on U.S. or Israeli territory, or a major incident involving mass civilian casualties. Observable signs would include mobilization of Iranian ground units, coalition airstrikes expanding into new provinces, and emergency summits among Gulf states invoking collective defense. Oil prices and freight rates would spike sharply, and global equity markets could react within hours. Each scenario has its own set of markers, military, economic, and diplomatic, that analysts watch closely for early shifts in trajectory. Global energy markets now react in real time to every signal from the Gulf. As maritime routes face renewed uncertainty, even limited military moves can ripple through economies worldwide. Stability remains fragile, and the next miscalculation could redraw both alliances and the price of risk. Thanks for watching.